Before Rome, before Persia, one empire ruled the ancient world through fear, steel, and absolute control. This wasn't just another kingdom of mud brick walls and bronze spears. This was something new, something terrifying. This was the Neo-Assyrian Empire, history's first true superpower. For over 300 years, from the deserts of Egypt to the mountains of Iran, their name was whispered in dread. They forged an empire unlike any that had come before, setting a brutal blueprint for conquest that would echo for millennia. So, what made the Assyrians so different, so feared? Join us as we journey back into the heart of darkness and uncover the secrets of the empire that terrified the ancient world. To understand the Assyrians, you have to understand their world. Imagine the ancient Near East, a patchwork of competing kingdoms and city-states. In Mesopotamia, the land between the rivers, Tigris and Euphrates. For centuries, powers rose and fell. The Sumerians, the Akkadians, the Babylonians, the Hittites, they fought, they traded, they built magnificent cities, but none of them achieved what the Assyrians would. The Assyrians weren't newcomers. Their culture had existed for over 1,000 years. But around 911 BC, something changed. A new line of ruthless, ambitious kings ascended the throne in their heartland, the city of Ashur. They looked at the fractured world around them and saw not chaos, but opportunity. Their first innovation was the very concept of a professional, stand-in army. Before the Assyrians, warfare was seasonal. Farmers would put down their plows, pick up their spears, fight a campaign, and then go home for the harvest. The Assyrians threw that model away. Their army was a permanent, state-funded institution, constantly training, constantly campaigning, and loyal only to the king. This was a game changer. While their enemies were assembling their citizen militias, the Assyrian war machine was already on the march, a relentless, disciplined force that never stopped. And what a machine it was. The Assyrians were the undisputed masters of iron. While their neighbors were still fumbling with softer bronze, the Assyrians equipped their massive armies with iron swords, iron spearheads, and iron-tipped arrows. Iron was harder, held a sharper edge, and was more plentiful than the components of bronze. This gave them a decisive technological advantage in every single battle. An Assyrian infantryman, clad in iron-scale armor and wielding an iron sword, was a walking fortress against a Bronze Age opponent. Their cavalry, a new and terrifying addition to ancient warfare, could shatter enemy formations, while their chariots, now lighter and more maneuverable, served as mobile missile platforms. But their true genius, their most dreaded specialty, was siege warfare. Before the Assyrians, a well-fortified city could hold out for years. It was a tedious, costly affair. The Assyrians turned it into a science. They invented a terrifying arsenal of siege engines. They built colossal wooden towers on wheels that could be rolled up to the city walls, allowing archers to fire down on the defenders. They developed massive, iron-tipped battering rams, housed in armored sheds to protect the operators from arrows and boiling oil. These weren't just logs. They were sophisticated machines, swung on chains to deliver devastating, repetitive blows. And if brute force didn't work, they used psychological warfare. Assyrian engineers would undermine the walls, digging tunnels beneath the foundations until a section collapsed. They would build enormous earthen ramps right up to the top of the fortifications, allowing their soldiers to simply walk over the defenses. To the defenders trapped inside, watching these monstrous constructions rise day by day, it must have felt like the gods themselves were against them. There was no escape. The Assyrians didn't just conquer cities, they devoured them. But it wasn't just their military prowess that made them a superpower. It was what they did after the battle was won. This is where the Assyrian reputation for cruelty was truly forged. They were masters of psychological warfare on a grand, imperial scale. Their goal wasn't just to defeat their enemies, it was to break their will to ever resist again. Assyrian kings didn't just boast of their victories, they documented their brutality in horrifying detail on massive stone reliefs called orthostats that lined their polished walls. These weren't just art. They were propaganda, designed to be seen by visiting envoys and trembling vassals. These reliefs show cities being burned to the ground. They show captured soldiers being flayed alive, their skin peeled off, while they still breathed. They show prisoners being impaled on stakes outside their own city gates, a gruesome warning to anyone who passed by. Tongues are torn out, hands and feet are chopped off. The inscriptions are just as graphic. Kings boast of blinding entire populations, of building pillars of severed heads, of sowing the fields with salt so nothing would ever grow again. This wasn't random violence. It was calculated state policy. The message was clear. Resist us, and this will be your fate. Defy the will of the god Ashur and his chosen king, and your civilization will be erased from history. Another key pillar of their control was the policy of mass deportation. When the Assyrians conquered a region, they didn't just leave a garrison. They would systematically uproot tens, sometimes hundreds of thousands of people, and forcibly march them across the empire. Scribes, craftsmen, farmers, the entire ruling class all were exiled from their homeland and resettled in a foreign part of the Assyrian domain. This served multiple purposes. Firstly, it shattered local identities and loyalties, making rebellion almost impossible. You can't organize a revolt when you're a stranger in a strange land, surrounded by people who don't speak your language. Secondly, it allowed the Assyrians to move skilled labor where it was needed most, whether to build their magnificent new capital cities like Nineveh or to cultivate new farmland. It was a brutal but brutally effective method of social engineering, creating a homogenized, pacified, and productive empire. This unprecedented level of organization required a sophisticated bureaucracy. The Assyrians developed a highly efficient system of provinces, each governed by a loyal official who answered directly to the king. They built a royal road network, a precursor to the famous Persian system, complete with way stations and messengers. This allowed the king to send orders and receive intelligence with incredible speed. A rebellion in Syria could be known in Nineveh within days, and a punitive expedition would be on its way before the rebels could even consolidate their power. Taxes and tribute flowed into the royal coffers through this system, funding the army and the king's ambitious building projects. For the first time in history, a single ruler in a single capital city could exert direct, real-time control over a vast and diverse territory stretching for thousands of miles. This was the definition of a superpower. So, for 3 centuries, the Assyrian model of empire worked. Fear, efficiency, and iron kept the world in their grip. But empires built on such foundations are often brittle. The constant warfare was expensive. The endless cruelty bred a deep, simmering hatred among their subject peoples. Everyone the Assyrians had conquered was just waiting for a moment of weakness. That moment came in the late 7th century BC. A series of civil wars over the succession weakened the throne. Seizing the opportunity, a coalition of their most bitter enemies, led by the Babylonians from the south and the Medes from the east, rose up in a great revolt. This wasn't just another rebellion. This was a war of annihilation. The hatred the Assyrians had sown was now being reaped. The allied armies reached the gates of the unconquerable capital Nineveh. After a desperate siege, the city fell, and the victors showed the Assyrians the same mercy the Assyrians had shown the world. The city was looted, burned to the ground, and so thoroughly destroyed that its location was lost to history for over 2,000 years. The great Assyrian cities were wiped from the map. The Assyrian people were scattered. Their empire, which had seemed eternal and invincible, vanished so completely that it became little more than a terrifying legend in the pages of the Bible. But their legacy did not disappear. The Assyrians had created a new model for empire. Their methods of administration, their military organization, even their tactics of terror were studied and copied by those who came after. The Babylonians who overthrew them, the Persians who overthrew the Babylonians, and even Alexander the Great and the Romans all learned from the Assyrian blueprint. They showed the world how to build an empire through centralized control, relentless military innovation, and overwhelming psychological force. They were the dark pioneers, the architects of a new age of imperial power. Before Rome, before Persia, there was Assyria, an empire forged in fire, ruled by fear and ultimately consumed by the very hatred it created. Have you ever heard of the Assyrian Empire? For most people, the name conjures images of brutal conquest, towering ziggurats, and fierce, bearded kings who ruled with an iron fist. They were, without a doubt, one of the most feared and formidable military powers of the ancient world. Their empire stretched from the mountains of Iran to the banks of the Nile, built on a foundation of discipline, innovation, and sheer, unapologetic violence. But what if I told you that this very same empire, notorious for its cruelty, was also responsible for one of an act of cultural preservation so profound that it shaped the very course of human history? What if I told you that the most violent empire in the ancient world also gave us the world's first, truly great library? This is the story of a paradox. It's the story of King Ashurbanipal, a ruler known for both his ruthlessness and his love of learning. And it's the story of his magnificent library at Nineveh, a collection of knowledge that survived the fall of his empire to speak to us across millennia. So, how did a king famed for flaying his enemies alive and decorating his capital with their heads become the world's first great librarian? To understand this, we need to travel back in time, to the 7th century BC, to the heart of the mighty Neo-Assyrian Empire. The city of Nineveh, located on the eastern bank of the Tigris River in modern-day Iraq, was the largest city in the world at its peak. It was a sprawling metropolis of temples, palaces, and gardens, all protected by immense walls. This was the showpiece of the Assyrian Empire, a testament to its power and wealth. And on the throne sat Ashurbanipal. Unlike many of his predecessors who were primarily military men, Ashurbanipal was different. From a young age, he was groomed not just as a warrior and a ruler, but as a scholar. He was one of the few kings of his time who could read and write, and not just in his native Akkadian, but in the ancient and scholarly language of Sumerian as well. He boasted about his education, claiming he could decipher difficult tablets whose Sumerian is obscure and whose Akkadian is hard to interpret correctly. This wasn't just royal propaganda. It was a core part of his identity. Ashurbanipal was obsessed with knowledge. He believed that the wisdom of the past held the key to understanding the present and controlling the future. He saw knowledge as a form of power, just as potent as his armies, and he was determined to gather all the knowledge of the known world into one place, his capital Nineveh. So, he embarked on an ambitious, unprecedented project. He dispatched scribes and agents across his vast empire, from Babylonia in the south to the far reaches of his domain. Their mission was to find, copy, and bring back every important text they could get their hands on. They scoured ancient temples, scribal schools, and private collections, seeking out everything from religious hymns and royal correspondence to scientific treatises and epic poems. If a tablet couldn't be bought or borrowed, it was simply taken. This was, after all, the Assyrian Empire. A letter from the king to a Babylonian official makes his intentions crystal clear. Hunt for the valuable tablets, which are in your archives, and which do not exist in Assyria, and send them to me. I have written to the officials and overseers, and no one shall withhold a tablet from you. And when you see any tablet or ritual about which I have not written to you, but which you perceive may be profitable for my palace, seek it out, take it, and send it to me. This was a systematic, state-sponsored effort to create a universal library. But what were these texts? They weren't books as we know them. They were cuneiform tablets, wedge-shaped writing pressed into damp clay with a stylus, which was then baked hard in a kiln. This simple technology proved to be incredibly durable, while the papyrus scrolls of Egypt and the parchment of later civilizations since turned to dust. Thousands of Ashurbanipal-esque clay tablets have survived for over 600 years, preserved by the very fire that destroyed the city around them. When archaeologists began excavating the ruins of Nineveh in the mid-19th century, they unearthed a treasure trove. They found over 30,000 of these clay tablets and fragments. It was a comprehensive collection of Mesopotamian thought. There were medical texts describing diagnoses, treatments, and surgical procedures. There were astronomical observations, meticulously charting the movements of stars and planets, used for both scientific study and divination. There were dictionaries, lists of plants and animals, legal codes, mathematical problems, and detailed guides on how to interpret omens from the flight of birds or the shape of a sheep's liver. It was a library organized with surprising sophistication. Tablets were sorted by subject matter. They were cataloged, and many included a colophon, a kind of ancient copyright notice at the end. This colophon would often name the original scribe, the source of the text, and, most importantly, state that it was the property of the palace of Ashurbanipal, king of the world, king of Assyria. Some even carried a curse against anyone who might steal them. Whosoever shall carry off this tablet, may Ashur and Velit overthrow him in wrath and anger, and destroy his name and his seed in the land. He was serious about his collection, and among this vast repository of knowledge, one work stood out above all others: the Epic of Gilgamesh. While the story of Gilgamesh is much older than Ashurbanipal's time, it was in his library that the most complete and standardized version was found. This epic poem, one of the earliest surviving works of literature, tells the story of a legendary king's quest for immortality. It grapples with universal themes of friendship, loss, the fear of death, and the search for meaning. And hidden within its narrative was a story that would shock the 19th century world. An account of a great flood sent by the gods to wipe out humanity, with a hero who builds a great boat to save himself, his family, and the animals. The parallels to the biblical story of Noah's Ark were undeniable and sparked a fierce debate that continues to this day. Without Ashurbanipal's library, this masterpiece of world literature might have been lost to us forever. The library was more than just a collection. It was a living institution. It was staffed by an army of scribes, scholars, and translators who were constantly at work, copying, editing, and studying the texts. It was a center of learning, a place where the knowledge of generations was not just stored, but actively used and built upon. Ashurbanipal himself was deeply involved, consulting the tablets for guidance on statecraft, warfare, and religious rituals. He used the omen texts to predict the future, and the medical texts to address his own health concerns. For him, the library was a practical tool of governance. But the Assyrian Empire, built on a foundation of terror and exploitation, could not last. Its enemies were many, and its subjects were resentful. Just a few years after Ashurbanipal's death, a coalition of Babylonians and Medes, the magnificent palaces were burned, the temples were plundered, and the great city was reduced to a mound of rubble. The empire that had dominated the Near East for 3 centuries collapsed in a storm of fire and vengeance. And yet, in that moment of ultimate destruction, a miracle occurred. The fires that consumed Ashurbanipal's palaces baked the thousands of clay tablets in his library, hardening them like stone. The very flames meant to destroy his legacy ended up preserving it for eternity. The library, and the knowledge it contained, was buried beneath the ruins, waiting. For over 2.5 millennia, the wisdom of Mesopotamia lay silent, entombed in the earth. When these tablets were finally rediscovered and deciphered, they opened up a lost world. They gave us a direct window into the minds of the people of ancient Mesopotamia, their beliefs, their fears, their scientific achievements, and their literary genius. We learned about their gods, their laws, their medicine, and their day-to-day lives in unprecedented detail. It was the birth of a whole new field of study. The decipherment of cuneiform, spurred by the discovery of the library, allowed us to read the history of the ancient Near East. In its own words for the first time. Was he a bloodthirsty tyrant or an enlightened patron of the arts and sciences? The truth is, he was both. He was a product of his time, a ruthless conqueror who understood that knowledge was the ultimate weapon and the ultimate form of control. He didn't collect these texts out of a pure, altruistic love for learning. He did it to strengthen his kingdom, to understand the will of the gods, and to cement his own power. He wanted to possess all the wisdom of the world, to make it his own. But his motives, in the end, don't diminish the monumental achievement. By creating the first systematic, universal library, Ashurbanipal set a precedent that would echo through the ages, influencing the great libraries of Alexandria, Pergamum, and beyond. Who understood perhaps better than anyone before him that physical empires crumble and turn to dust, but knowledge, if properly preserved, can achieve a kind of immortality. The story of Ashurbanipal and his library is a powerful reminder that history is rarely black and white. It teaches us that civilization is a complex tapestry, woven from threads of both brutality and brilliance, creation and destruction. The Assyrians may have been the villains of the ancient world, but in the smoldering ruins of their capital, they left behind a gift of incalculable value, a library of clay that became a library for all humanity. In the annals of history, some empires built legacies of art, philosophy, and trade, but one empire carved its name into the stone tablets of time with iron, blood, and fear. For them, mercy was a weakness, a luxury they could not afford. Their name would become a byword for brutality, a chilling whisper passed down through generations. This is the story of the Neo-Assyrian Empire, and how they perfected the art of ruling through terror. For nearly 300 years, from the late 10th century to the late 7th century BC, the Assyrians dominated the Near East. From the mountains of Anatolia to the deserts of Egypt, their armies were an unstoppable force. But it wasn't just their military might that brought kings and nations to their knees. It was their calculated, systematic use of psychological warfare. The Assyrians understood something profound about human nature, that the fear of pain can be a more powerful motivator than the pain itself. Their strategy began with a simple, brutal message delivered to any city that dared to resist them: surrender or be utterly destroyed. And this was no idle threat. The Assyrian war machine was ruthless and efficient. When a city fell after a siege, the consequences were designed to be unforgettable. The Assyrians didn't just conquer, they made an example. Their own royal inscriptions, meant to be read by subjects and enemies alike, boast of their actions. They speak of razing cities to the ground, salting the earth so nothing would grow again, and carrying off immense spoils. One of the cornerstones of this policy of fear was mass deportation. When the Assyrians conquered a region, they would uproot entire populations. Tens, sometimes hundreds of thousands of people, men, women, and children would be forced to march hundreds of miles to other parts of the empire. Imagine the scene: a long, sorrowful column of people, torn from their homes, their land, and everything they had ever known. They were driven like cattle, with little food or water, their future uncertain. This policy served multiple purposes. First, it shattered the identity and resistance of the conquered people. By scattering them across the vast empire, they were cut off from their cultural roots, their temples, and their leaders. They became a displaced, demoralized workforce. Second, it populated newly conquered or strategic areas with loyal or at least pacified subjects. Skilled artisans, scribes, and laborers were relocated to build the grand Assyrian cities like Nineveh and Nimrud. It was a cruel but effective way to break the will of their enemies and build their own state at the same time. The famous lost 10 tribes of Israel were victims of this very policy. Deported by the Assyrians in the 8th century BC and scattered, their ultimate fate lost to history. Beyond deportation, the Assyrians employed brutal punishments as a deterrent. Their kings openly bragged about the gruesome fates awaiting those who defied them. While we won't go into graphic detail, the public nature of these punishments was key. They were meant to be seen and heard about. Assyrian kings would commission massive, carved stone panels, called reliefs, to decorate their palace walls. These weren't just art, they were propaganda. Imagine walking through the halls of an Assyrian palace. On every wall you would see vivid scenes of Assyrian military triumphs. You'd see long lines of captives, heads bowed, being led away from their burning cities. You'd see images depicting the severe punishments inflicted upon rebel leaders. These reliefs were a constant, silent reminder to visiting dignitaries, ambassadors, and even the Assyrian court itself of the price of disobedience. The message was clear and unambiguous. This is what happens to our enemies. Do not become one of them. The psychological impact of this cannot be overstated. Fear became a political weapon, wielded with surgical precision. The tales of Assyrian cruelty would travel far faster than their armies. A king in a small city-state, hearing about what happened to his neighbor, would be faced with a terrifying choice. Identities, total annihilation for his people, or submit, pay the heavy tribute, and live to see another day. Most chose submission. The Assyrians had won the battle before their soldiers even arrived at the gates. This reign of terror was orchestrated from the very top. Kings like Ashurbanipal II and Sennacherib cultivated this fearsome image. Their royal inscriptions are filled with language designed to inspire dread. They called themselves King of the Universe, the Great King, the one without rival. They presented themselves as the divine instruments of their god. Ashur, whose will demanded the expansion and subjugation of all lands. To resist Assyria was to resist the gods themselves, a blasphemous act that deserved the harshest retribution. This strategy was incredibly effective. For a time, the Assyrian Empire grew to be the largest the world had ever seen. The tribute and resources plundered from conquered lands funded a massive building program, creating magnificent cities filled with libraries, gardens, and towering. The library of Ashurbanipal in Nineveh, for example, held thousands of clay tablets, including the Epic of Gilgamesh, preserving knowledge for millennia. This is the great paradox of Assyria. An empire of immense cruelty that was also a center of culture and learning. They were destroyers and builders, barbarians and scholars. But an empire built on fear rests on a fragile foundation. Fear breeds resentment, and resentment, given the chance, ignites into rebellion. The constant pressure of maintaining control over a vast, hostile population was immense. The resources required for continuous military campaigns were staggering. For centuries, the Assyrians managed this brutal balancing act, but eventually, the hatred they had sown began to bear fruit. By the late 7th century BC, the empire was overstretched. A coalition of their long-suffering subjects, led by the Babylonians from the south and the Medes from the east, saw their chance. They rose up in a massive, coordinated rebellion. This wasn't just another regional revolt. This was a war for survival and revenge. The fighting was apocalyptic. The subject peoples, fueled by generations of stored-up hatred, fought with a ferocity that matched the Assyrians' own. In 612 BC, the unthinkable happened. The great city of Nineveh, the heart of the Assyrian Empire, a city once thought to be impregnable, was besieged, captured, and utterly destroyed. The conquerors showed the Assyrians the same level of mercy that the Assyrians had shown to others. An empire that had terrorized the Near East for 3 centuries vanished from history almost overnight. Its great cities were reduced to ruins, buried beneath the sands, and its people were scattered. The name of Assyria became a curse, a memory of a terrible nightmare that had finally ended. So total was their destruction that for 2,000 years, the legendary city of Nineveh was thought to be a myth, until its ruins were rediscovered in the 19th century. The story of the Neo-Assyrian Empire serves as a powerful and timeless lesson. It demonstrates that while fear can be a potent tool for control, it is not a sustainable foundation for power. It creates an empire of subjects, not citizens. An empire of simmering rage, not loyalty. The Assyrians built a world on the principle that mercy was weakness, but in the end, their own lack of it proved to be their fatal flaw. The terror they inspired eventually turned back on them, consuming their empire in a firestorm of retribution. Their legacy is a stark reminder, etched in stone and clay. An empire built solely on fear will one day be consumed by it. Imagine a time when war was a seasonal affair. When the harvest was done, farmers would pick up their spears, go fight, and then return to their fields. Armies were temporary, cobbled together, and frankly, not very good at their job. But then, one empire decided to change the game entirely. They didn't just create an army. They created a machine. This is the story of the world's first professional army and how it rewrote the rules of power. Before the Assyrian Empire, the idea of a standing army, a force of full-time, paid soldiers was almost unthinkable. It was expensive, it was risky, and it took able-bodied men away from producing food. But the Assyrians saw it differently. They saw an investment. Instead of relying on citizen soldiers who were farmers first and fighters second, they created a class of men whose only job was war. This was revolutionary. These weren't men who trained for a few weeks a year. They trained every single day. They lived and breathed military discipline. This constant readiness meant the Assyrian army could be deployed at a moment's notice, in any season, giving them a massive strategic advantage over their neighbors who were still tied to the agricultural calendar. This professional force wasn't just a concept. It was a physical reality. They were a terrifying sight on the battlefield. Think about it. An army of part-time farmers faces a force of career soldiers. The farmers are worried about their land, their families, their next harvest. The Assyrian soldiers are worried about one thing: victory. Their entire livelihood, their status, their very identity was tied to their role as a warrior. This singular focus created a level of cohesion and ruthless efficiency that the ancient world had never seen before. It was the difference between a local club and a world-class professional sports team. One plays for a hobby, the other plays to dominate. And dominate, they did. But being a professional soldier is only half the story. You need the right tools for the job. And the Assyrians had the best tools available, thanks to a technological leap that gave them a killer edge: iron. While their enemies were still largely wielding bronze weapons, the Assyrians had mastered ironworking on a massive scale. Bronze is a good metal, but iron is harder, holds a sharper edge, and most importantly, it's far more abundant. This meant the Assyrians could equip their entire massive army with top-tier weapons and armor. We're talking iron-tipped spears, iron swords, and iron helmets. Imagine the clash of battle. A bronze sword strikes an iron shield and shatters. A bronze-tipped spear glances off a suit of Assyrian iron scale metal. For the soldiers facing them, it must have felt like fighting an army of invincible demons. Their best weapons were practically useless. The Assyrian iron advantage wasn't just a slight improvement. It was a game-changer. It allowed them to break enemy lines with brutal force, confident that their equipment would outperform anything the opposition could throw at them. This technological superiority, combined with their professional training, made them an almost unstoppable force. So you have professional soldiers with the best weapons. What next? You need to organize them. An army isn't just a mob of well-armed individuals. It's a complex, coordinated system. And this is where the Assyrian military genius truly shines. They developed a sophisticated and hierarchical command structure that was centuries ahead of its time. At the very top, of course, was the king, the commander-in-chief. But below him was a network of generals, officers, and NCOs, each with clearly defined roles and responsibilities. The army was broken down into manageable units. The smallest unit was a squad of 10 men, led by a designated commander. These squads were then grouped into companies of 50 to 200 men. Several companies formed a larger regiment. This modular system meant that orders could be passed down the chain of command quickly and efficiently. A general didn't have to shout orders to 10,000 men at once. He could give a command to subordinate officers, who would then relay it to their unit leaders, ensuring that even in the chaos of battle, the entire army could move and act as a single, cohesive entity. This level of organization allowed for complex maneuvers, flanking attacks, and disciplined formations that would leave their less organized enemies in disarray. And what about the soldiers themselves? The Assyrian army was a meritocracy. A soldier could rise through the ranks based on skill and bravery, not just noble birth. This provided a powerful incentive for every man to fight his best. The army was also a true combat arms force. It wasn't just a mass of infantry. They had distinct, specialized units that worked in concert. There were the spearmen, forming the solid backbone of the army in tight phalanx-like formations. There were the archers, who would rain down arrows from a distance to soften up the enemy before the main assault. Then there were the cavalry. The Assyrians were pioneers in using mounted troops, not just for scouting, but as a decisive shock force on the battlefield. But their most feared unit, the one that became their calling card, was the war chariot. These were heavy, two-wheeled platforms, pulled by 2 or 3 horses, crewed by a driver and 1 or 2 warriors armed with bows and spears. A chariot charge was the ancient equivalent of a tank assault. It was a terrifying spectacle of thunderous hooves, rattling wheels, and screaming men, capable of punching holes in any enemy formation and sowing panic and chaos. Beyond the battlefield, the Assyrians were masters of another crucial aspect of warfare: logistics and engineering. An army marches on its stomach, and the Assyrians understood this better than anyone. They had a dedicated corps responsible for supply chains, ensuring that their massive army was always fed, equipped, and paid. This allowed them to campaign for extended periods, far from their homeland, without the risk of starvation. For a city in the ancient Near East, seeing the Assyrian army appear on the horizon with its train of siege engines was a death sentence. There was very little that could stand in their way. You organized them into a sophisticated, hierarchical structure with specialized units like infantry, archers, cavalry, and the devastating war chariots. You support them with unparalleled logistics and a terrifyingly effective corps of siege engineers. What you get is not just an army. You get an empire-building machine. The Assyrian military wasn't designed just to win battles. It was designed for conquest and control. It was the instrument that allowed a small northern Mesopotamian kingdom to grow and dominate the entire Near East for centuries, forging one of the largest empires the world had yet seen. Their methods were often brutal, but their effectiveness was undeniable. They set a new standard for what a military could be, creating a blueprint for professional armies that would be studied and emulated by future empires, from the Persians to the Romans and beyond. They proved that war was no longer a farmer's seasonal chore. It was a profession, a science, and the ultimate tool of state power. What do you do when conquest becomes a routine? When the thunder of your army's march is the empire's national anthem? For the Assyrian king Sargon II, this wasn't a hypothetical question. It was just another Tuesday. He inherited an empire, but he forged a machine, a relentless, brutally efficient engine of expansion that would redefine the ancient world. Forget what you think you know about ancient warfare. This wasn't just about battles and sieges. This was about logistics, administration, and a kind of controlled chaos that kept an entire continent in a state of perpetual fear and awe. When Sargon ascended to the throne in 722 BC, the Neo-Assyrian Empire was already a major power, but it was volatile. Rebellion simmered on its borders, and rivals watched for any sign of weakness. Sargon didn't just meet these challenges, he turned them into opportunities. His reign wasn't a series of disconnected campaigns. It was one continuous, rolling wave of conquest that swept across the Near East. From the mountains of Anatolia to the plains of Babylonia, from the shores of the Mediterranean to the heart of ancient Iran, Sargon's armies were everywhere. It's hard to overstate the scale of this expansion. Imagine the map of the Middle East literally being redrawn year after year with Assyrian red ink. We're talking about a territory that would eventually stretch over 1 million square kilometers, incorporating dozens of different peoples, cultures, and languages. And this wasn't just adding a city here or a province there. This was swallowing kingdoms whole. But here's the real genius of Sargon, and the secret to his expansion machine. It wasn't just about winning battles. Any warlord can win a battle. The true test of an empire is what happens the day after. How do you feed an army that's constantly on the move? How do you govern a territory that's doubling in size every few years? How do you control millions of people who really don't want to be controlled by you? Sargon's answer was a masterpiece of imperial engineering. First, logistics. The Assyrians built an incredible network of royal roads, supply depots, and communication posts. These weren't just dirt tracks. They were arteries of empire, allowing armies, messengers, and tribute to move with unprecedented speed. A message could travel from the western frontier to the capital in a matter of days, not weeks. An army running low on grain could be resupplied before the enemy even knew they were in trouble. This logistical network was the empire's circulatory system, pumping life into its military campaigns. Then came the policy of mass deportation. Now, this sounds brutal, and it was. But it was also a calculated tool of imperial control. When Sargon conquered a rebellious city or kingdom, he would uproot tens of thousands of its people's skilled artisans. Scribes, farmers, the elite, and resettle them in other parts of the empire. At the same time, he would move other conquered peoples into the newly vacated land. It was a terrifyingly effective strategy. It broke local loyalties, shattered resistance networks, and created a multicultural, blended population that was easier to govern from the center. It also served an economic purpose. These relocated populations brought their skills with them, contributing to massive building projects and agricultural development across Assyria. The new capital city Sargon built, Dosharokin, or Fortress of Sargon, was constructed almost entirely with the labor of these deportees. It was a city built by the conquered, for the conqueror, a constant, living monument to his power. And finally, there was the element of controlled chaos, or, as the Assyrians would have seen it, divine order. The king was the regent of the god Ashur on earth. His conquests weren't acts of aggression. They were the fulfillment of a divine mandate to bring order to a chaotic world. Every campaign was preceded by elaborate rituals, and every victory was meticulously documented in royal inscriptions and palace reliefs. These weren't just propaganda, they were a core part of the imperial ideology. The famous reliefs from Sargon's palace don't just show battle scenes, they show every single step of the process. The army marching, the siege engines being built, the city falling, the scribes counting the loot, the long lines of deportees being led away. It was a visual instruction manual on how the empire worked. It told every visitor, every vassal, and every subject. This is what happens when you obey, and this is what happens when you defy the will of Ashur and his king. So, when we look at Sargon II, we're not just looking at a successful general. We're looking at the architect of an imperial system. He took the foundations laid by his predecessors and built a skyscraper of an empire. He professionalized the army, perfected the logistics, and systematized the control of conquered peoples. He created a model of empire that was so effective, so ruthless, and so all-encompassing that it would be copied and adapted by later empires, from the Persians to the Romans. He turned the complex, messy business of conquest into a predictable, repeatable process. Sargon demonstrates a crucial lesson of history. The most powerful empires are just built on the strength of their armies, but on the sophistication of their systems. His expansion machine was fueled by iron and terror, but it was run on roads, records, and a relentless, unwavering belief in its own destiny. And at the heart of it all was the new capital Ashurbanipal. Built from nothing on a massive, raised platform, its walls soared into the sky. Its gates were flanked by colossal Lamassu human-headed winged bulls carved from single blocks of stone, guardians meant to intimidate and inspire. The palace within was a labyrinth of courtyards and halls, its walls covered in those detailed reliefs celebrating his triumphs. This city was Sargon's vision of the empire in miniature. Orderly, massive, centrally controlled, and built on the spoils of war. It was meant to be the eternal center of his world. Ironically, Sargon died in battle on a distant frontier in 705 BC, and his magnificent city was almost immediately abandoned by his son and successor. Dur-Sharukin, the fortress of Sargon, became a ghost town, a testament to the fact that even the most powerful machines of empire are ultimately dependent on the will of a single man. The system he built, however, would outlive him, pushing the Assyrian Empire to its greatest territorial extent and leaving a legacy that shaped the course of history for centuries to come. Imagine a civilization not born from peace and plenty, but forged in fire, hardship, and the constant struggle for survival. Assyria was not destined for a peaceful existence. It was forged for war from its very inception. The story of Assyria is the ultimate testament to how geography and circumstance can shape a people's destiny, turning a small, vulnerable kingdom into one of the most feared empires the world has ever known. They didn't just adapt to their harsh environment, they weaponized it, turning the very struggle for survival into a relentless drive for conquest. The Assyrian war machine was about to be unleashed, and the ancient world would never be the same. Every military campaign was a holy war, waged in the name of Ashur. To reinforce this image of absolute power, the Assyrians became masters of propaganda. They didn't have social media, but they had something far more permanent. Stone. The king's image was everywhere. Giant, intimidating statues, called Lamassu winged bulls, with human heads guarded the palace gates, symbolizing the king's divine protection and fearsome power. These weren't just art. They were statements of dominance, designed to awe and intimidate all who entered. Inside the palaces, the walls were covered in intricate carved reliefs. These weren't just decorations. They were storyboards of power. They depicted the king in heroic scenes, leading his armies into battle, single-handedly hunting lions and receiving endless lines of tribute from humbled foreign rulers. The message was clear and relentless. The king is invincible. The king is victorious. The king is the center of the universe. These reliefs were a constant, visual reminder of his unparalleled might. And then there were the inscriptions. Royal annals, carved into stone prisms and cylinders, were buried in the foundations of buildings. They meticulously recorded the king's achievements, especially his military campaigns. But these weren't objective historical records. They were carefully crafted narratives of terror. They described, in gruesome detail, the fates of cities that dared to resist. CTS burned populations deported, and rebel leaders flayed alive. I built a pillar over against his city gate, and I flayed all the chief men who had revolted, and I covered the pillar with their skins. This wasn't just a boast, it was a psychological weapon. These texts were meant to be read, to be known, to spread fear far and wide. The goal was to make the very idea of rebellion unthinkable. The king's power wasn't just enforced by his armies, but by the terror his reputation inspired. Symbols of power were also crucial. The king was often depicted with a mace and a scepter, ancient symbols of authority and justice. He wore a distinctive, conical crown, setting him apart from all other mortals. Even the architecture of his cities, particularly the capital, was a testament to his power. The sheer scale and magnificence of the palaces and temples were designed to overwhelm visitors, reinforcing the idea that they were in the presence of a ruler whose resources and power were limitless. Interestingly, this immense power was focused entirely on the person of the king, not on the people. Assyrian art rarely depicts common individuals. The focus is always on the king, the gods, and the state's enemies. The Assyrian people were largely invisible in the official narrative, their role simply to serve the state and its divine ruler. Their obedience wasn't won through a social contract or a sense of shared citizenship. It was demanded through a combination of religious doctrine and overwhelming fear. This system of absolute power was incredibly effective, allowing Assyria to build and maintain a vast empire for centuries. The king was the sun around which the entire Assyrian world revolved. He was the chief priest, the supreme commander, the ultimate judge, and the living embodiment of the god Ashur on earth. His authority was absolute because it was divine, and his rule was maintained not just by soldiers and spears, but by the powerful, terrifying stories he carved into stone. It was a kingship built on a foundation of divine right and cemented with fear, creating a legacy of absolute power that still fascinates and horrifies us today. The Assyrian kings proved that true power isn't just about what you can do, but what people believe you can do. Thank you so much for watching. If you found this journey into the ancient world as fascinating as I did, please hit that like button and subscribe to the channel for more stories from the depths of history. Let me know in the comments what other historical paradoxes you'd like to explore. Until next time, keep digging into the past.